to today's Fightback session. I am Lily. I'm the coordinator of this virtual event series. And while everybody's dropping in, let me tell you a couple of words about who we are and the mission that we are on here. FoundersLane is a founders-driven corporate venture builder in climate and health, and we focus on an entrepreneurial mind for results-driven action to co-create a better world. And Fightback is the word that we coined in this context because in these days of massive business disruption, we want to contribute by giving our business leaders and their companies actionable insight and advice to not only survive, but really thrive in the digital economy that awaits us. In today's conversation, we'll explore already part 3 of the Circular Economy series on how far does your ROI measure go? Impact measurements driving the future of an integrated ROI. I'm really looking forward to this one. If you missed part 1 and 2 of the series, they are available on our YouTube channel. I can post the link again in the chat, so make sure to check them out after the session. You are joining today's conversation with 3 very remarkable people. So we have Senior Venture Developer and Partner of the FIGHTBACK Built Environment Alliance, Adam. We have Frank, the co-founder and lead of the climate vertical at FoundersLane. And we are very honored to welcome our remarkable guest speaker for today, Nikki. She's the Senior Research Analyst at MacArthur Foundation, working with Data Metrics team to develop a rollout of a very cool measurement tool that she's going to tell us a bit more later.
Welcome also from my side. Definitely appreciate that everyone's tuning in. We have, I think, a very important topic today. Today's webinar will be about why it's important to strive for an integrated ROI that looks beyond economic gains alone. But we also discuss approaches on how to measure that. As Lily already mentioned, this is part of a series on circularity. If you missed the other ones, you can look it up in the channel. But also you find other interesting webinars from my colleagues, for example, on health topics. So I'll first do an intro on the problems of externalities that companies are also actually starting to address. Then Adam will take over. He will talk about how to develop an integrated ROI and highlight how none of this is possible without proper measurements. Now, we actually think that all companies need to go circular, but you also need to measure it. And that is where our guest speaker, Nikki will tell us all about. She's a senior researcher from MacArthur Foundation and will tell us about CIRCULYTICS. It makes it easier to measure circularity. Now, Lily already mentioned a little bit about FoundersLane, but I'd like to give you a little bit more of the background still. For those who don't know FoundersLane, we are the leading independent corporate venture builder of Europe. We build new ventures together with corporates by using an unfair advantage that a corporate has and combined it with our entrepreneurial mindset. Now, the 3 founders, all entrepreneurs, bring extensive experience in investing, venture building, board membership participation, as well as setting up entrepreneurial operating models with growth boards. Now, we've worked with more than 30 selected corporate partners, from the 110-year-old state-owned energy company Vattenfall to corporates in packaging, financing, and health. And as we're independent, we build tech in-house, mainly based out of our Cologne office, where our tech team resides. Now, indeed, we are not here to talk about big profits only. We are builders, we are doers. We want to create an impact through corporate venture building. We do that in those areas that are most impactful, in the interrelated areas of climate and health. Now, in the climate vertical, we build low carbon and regenerative new businesses that are transforming society. We have a particular focus on digital ventures and platform economics. And we also see that platforms can be enablers of sustainable progress, such as a move towards working with renewables, move towards circularity, and working in more efficient ways. For us, therefore, an important part of venture building is creating impact. Some of our most successful ventures have impact from the beginning, basically from the core of their strategy. But as mentioned, we are focusing today on integrated ROI. But why actually is it that we do that? Why should we? Because if we look only at profits divided by total investments, we are using such a narrow definition, one that is also actually very short-term. The result? That many elements are unaccounted for. A lot of externalities. Now, of course, the most known one there is climate change caused by carbon emissions. There has actually been no war, no economic crisis, or no other pandemic that had such a big impact on carbon emission reductions as the corona crisis. Yet we're reaching only 4 to 7% drop in carbon emissions. And that is with the lockdowns, planes grounded and economies coming to a near standstill. Now, it could reach 7% if lockdown measures continue throughout the year, but actually many of the countries have already opened up again. What we need, however, is a 7.6% drop year on year, that is, in order to reach the vital 1.5 degree maximum temperature rise. Now, that is if we want to avoid the most drastic consequences of climate change. So that really shows that we need fundamental change, and we need it fast. So within FoundersLane, as part of Build Environment Alliance, we have been running a series of interviews to both build the alliance as well as to share knowledge. And in these series, we spoke to many influential people in the built environment. Amongst it, Richard Templer, the director of the Grantham Institute. And he mentioned that we know that some sort of virus would emerge one day again. We know that we don't know exactly when or how, in what form, what scale, but we expect that it would come. Were we prepared? Not really. But it was also a known unknown. Climate change, on the other hand, is a known known. We know it is coming, and we can predict pretty good what the consequences will be, unless we're going well above the 1.5 degree increase. In that case, all sorts of scenarios can come in place, with feedback loops that could trigger and accelerate temperature increases even further. So with this knowledge, it basically means that we no longer have a responsibility to act, but we have an obligation. So why are we not doing more? We are calling on all stakeholders to fight back against climate change. And that is consumers that can drive change from businesses with their purchasing power, governments that can drive the vision and set regulation to accelerate change, and of course, businesses itself, with all the assets they have and therefore the potential impact this can create, and plenty of cooperation between them. For example, of course, between corporates and entrepreneurs. We are seeing, however, positive movements. Companies now, they argue themselves that shareholder value is no longer everything. In the last Davos event, everyone talked about stakeholder capitalism. Again, this is based on a model that's going beyond making money alone. So in the last 10 years, there's been a total shift in companies that have now seriously started to report on environmental, social, and governance measures to measure sustainability and social impact of their businesses. So this is really positive. From only 20% of S&P 500 companies in 2013 to the complete opposite of that today. Now that is partly due to regulation, partially due to societal pressures, and partially because corporates argue that they themselves have the responsibility to do so. And they set themselves targets as well. So also part of an interview series in the built environment, we spoke, for example, to someone from a private equity firm, and they were tasked by their clients that manage real estate to reduce carbon emissions in buildings. They assessed what they could do within buildings, energy reduction, and they found out that they could reduce energy usage of those buildings by 50%. But they also found that they could make it carbon negative. But the consequences of doing that is that the added cost of it would be so high that there was no real trade-off in doing so, at least not from a purely ROI perspective. Now, would they have looked at a more integrated ROI perspective, they would probably have come to a very different conclusion. Now, fortunately, there are many companies that have set themselves goals to become carbon neutral. That's, of course, part of the solution. Iberdrola in 2015, Vestas in 2030, Vattenfall within one generation, or Microsoft that wants to become carbon negative already by 2030. But setting these goals and reaching them is something very different. Now, again, of course, we are biased as FoundersLane, but we argue that corporate venture building can play a role in this. For example, by the venture that we created at CIRCULYTICS. It's today the fastest growing solar analytics company of the planet, with 100,000 PV plants connected and operating in more than 42 countries. So of course, we're kind of proud on that one, definitely. So Felix, the founder of the company FoundersLane, our company, started a movement that is called FIGHTBACK. This movement is aimed to bring a community of business, public, private, and academic leaders together and drive positive change. Through industry alliances, sharing information, for example, on circularity, by actively driving the discussion, and definitely by doing. So there has already also been written a book about it. It's been a #1 bestseller on Amazon in the field of entrepreneurship. However, due to big changes that we've experienced, one of which actually COVID is actually just an example of it, we wrote very recently a second book to stress and urge new system solutions. This will be available after summer. And in this book, we interviewed, again, a lot of people, corporate leaders, academics, entrepreneurs worldwide. One of them is one of the most influential business thinkers of our age, Rita McGrath. She's a professor at Columbia University. And we interviewed it for the new edition, where she said that she urged, or basically that she mentioned that the negative externalities that the current way of working and doing business is such a key problem that needs to be addressed. For example, if you're flying to Venice, the company isn't paying for these negative externalities. So that is something that basically the airline is getting a free ride at the expense ultimately of the citizens and of the environment. The same accounts also for companies in mining, in fast fashion, or in single-use plastics production. They're all able to make profits because they don't have to pay the full cost that they're being incurred. Now that's a major flaw of currently doing business. Now that touches again directly on the point of externalities. This needs to be addressed. Now carbon emissions, of course, is only one form of waste. It's only one form of the externalities. It is the most prominent example, though, of non-circularity. There are, however, many other externalities that need to be included within a fully integrated ROI. We have now focused on carbon emissions and the resulting climate change, as again, it's the most prominent and it strikes most to mind. However, when measuring circularity, we can also focus on products, material flaws, efficient material use, avoiding waste, raw material waste, even inclusion, empowerment, and so on. Yet the more intangible it becomes, the harder, of course, it becomes to measure. Now, the good thing is that more and more companies want to prioritize this. They want to measure it. They want to do something about it. And they move away from business that is measured purely on ROI and net present value, and many of the other only financial terms. Now, from our experience in working with many large corporates, we found that many corporates actually don't know how they should then do it. And then Adam will provide a starting point on how this can be done.
I'm going to provide a high-level journey on how you can transition to an integrated ROI. It's going to be going through a few key steps, highlighting some main points. And if you have any interest in learning more in detail, please do feel free to reach out and contact. So I just wanted to share this quote by Michael Porter. A lot of people might be aware of Michael Porter if you're from a consulting background or have done an MBA, been to business school, one of the key economic theory thinkers. And he actually back almost a decade ago started talking about the purpose of corporations must be redefined as creating shared value. So creating shared value means that you're not just focusing on the profits and you need to look beyond. And this is where the next wave of innovation and productivity growth in the global economy will come from. I apologize for all the ones. It's what happens when we download from Google Docs to PowerPoint, but I'm going to take you through a 7-step process to actually to build what we call an integrated ROI, which looks beyond the purely economic financial measures. And as Frank mentioned earlier, none of this is actually possible without actually being able to measure impact or measure the changes that you can actually do. So just very quickly, what you need to do first is stop addressing sustainability as corporate social responsibility and dive in to making it something strategic. Start building sustainability capabilities in your company from the leadership as well as a culture. Start integrating sustainability into the mission of your corporation. Develop tangible sustainability objectives, not things that are too large. If you're going to go carbon neutral by 2050, build an objective that can meet that. Establish a thorough and consistent measurement system. None of this will be possible if you don't actually measure what you're doing. You can't find out where you're inefficient if you're not actually taking care of measuring. We measure everything to do with financial, the financial outputs, revenues, costs, etc. We need to start measuring the other externalities. Integrate impact measurement into decision making. How do we actually get all of this and use it to make a decision and mix it with financial measures? Finally, just go for it. Try sustainable change internally, externally, whether it's kind of improving your processes, your operations, or actually building new ideas, new projects, new products, and new ventures. So I just wanted to show this slide very quickly, starting with the first one, address sustainability as a strategic imperative. I'm going to use a case study company, which having read through quite a lot of companies and what they're doing, for me, this is one of the gold standards and you know, really far advanced in actually their sustainability and, you know, integrative way of doing business. So first of all, CSR. CSR has had a very good run, but CSR is incredibly under-equipped. CSR, the value is we're going to do good. It's about philanthropy, citizenship, and that kind of sustainability. It's, you know, discretionary. It's in response of external pressures. We're trying to look good to impress our customers. It's separate from profit maximization. It's financed in a completely different way to other strategic initiatives. You have a little budget for corporate social responsibility, which is tiny compared to the profits companies are often making. And, you know, the agenda is defined externally. It's based on personal preferences internally. And again, it's limited by its budget. We advocate that every company should try and move to creating shared value. And this is where, you know, value is an economic and societal benefit that's actually relative to cost. It's an investment in the company and the community that we can look into the future. And we want to create joint company and community value creation. Companies are not sitting outside of society, it's within society. It's companies are actually, you know, the employees are leaving work and joining society. So corporate social responsibility, giving back to society, it's, you know, a bit of a flawed logic if a company is actually part of society. It's becoming more and more integral to competing. And it's actually integral to profit maximization as well. If you're more sustainable, you have better energy use, better water use, better material use, you're more resource productive, you're actually maximizing your profits too. And I mean, this is incorporated with the company's strategic budgets as well. So giving an example, Telefonica, a Spanish communications company, become an incredibly innovative company, and they basically approved a 5-point plan marking a new era. And I've highlighted this part in the middle, where they want to be a company that's prepared for the next 100 years. This is, you know, due to the economic factors, societal changes, and environmental drivers. And it's, you know, committed to making the world more human and more sustainable. And the purpose of generating value for all stakeholders, not just shareholders. At the moment, from what I've seen, this is the issue. Organization strategic decisions. Sustainability manager, corporate social responsibility are sitting relatively low in what they can do to larger strategic decisions, quite a few layers between them and the larger kind of CFO, CEO, Chief Strategy Officer, etc. And this has to change. And we actually are starting to see this change quite a lot, especially in the fashion industry, where chief sustainability officers are becoming a more and more integral role with a more and more strategic role within the C-suite. Very happy to see that we're getting more and more circular economy leads or experts in circular economy joining companies. Circular economy is an incredibly technical subject. And I've seen so many companies just wave the term around and actually, do you understand it? What does it mean? How do you integrate it? So it's great to have more and more people who are actually specializing in this field and who can actually drive this and actually share it within the company. And once you have this sort of leadership, you can really sort of drive an impact culture. You can start building a larger sustainability team. But sustainability should be beyond the team. It's the entire company should have this mentality of sustainability. So company-wide education, training, etc. Start doing internal impact projects. How can you actually become carbon neutral, for example, internally, or carbon negative if you're ambitious? And what else can you add on top? Could you actually drive new ventures? We've spoken to some companies who said, hey, we're connected to thousands, hundreds of thousands of SMEs. What if we could create new ventures, new ideas, new platforms to make them more sustainable as well? And going back to our case study, Telefonica, they've actually incorporated something called the V Sustainable Innovation Initiative. And they basically encourage employees, suppliers, startups, and lots of people who are connected to Telefonica in different ways to actually collaborate with Telefonica to come up with business cases for different initiatives that actually address sustainable development goals. And those that are successful, they will actually fund and incubate and help. So we talked a bit about integrating sustainability. How do you integrate sustainability into the core mission? A very good starting point, and a lot of work has been done, is the UN Sustainable Development Goals. We used to have the 5 Millennium Development Goals, which were far too broad, and we saw very little progress actually being done. The 17 actually creates a really nice pick and mix that you can choose of different sustainability goals that you can address that are relevant to your core and actually directly, strategically on the same track. With the Sustainable Development Goals, the simplest way to start is just select some. Which ones are the most strategically relevant to your core business model? And again, our little best practice company, Telefonica, have done exactly that. They're a telecommunications company, and they've put the SDG number 9, which is industry, innovation, and infrastructure, as the core. And basically, they use this as a starting point to develop sustainable development objectives. Another one that some of you might be familiar with is the materiality sort of assessment. The materiality assessment is, hey, what are the key stakeholders surrounding my company interested in? And what are they motivated by? And how do we actually measure, how are we doing on it? For that, we actually need to measure it. But anyway, actually getting feedback from your direct stakeholders and looking at the UN SDGs gives you a great starting point to start developing objectives. And different objectives can actually link between the materiality assessment and the Sustainable Development Goals. And looking again at Telefonica, it's okay, we want to be carbon neutral by 2050, minus 50% by 2025, 70% by 2030. And this is linked to a couple of our core values, our Sustainable Development Goal. How do we do it? Well, let's break this down into smaller targets that are more tangible, more achievable, and we can actually do it. So energy efficiency, renewable energy, how can we actually influence our suppliers and get our supply chain to be more carbon efficient, emission efficient? How can we help our customers? And the next step is really, right, not the next step, this is something that you need to take into consideration right from the beginning is, okay, we need to actually measure this. We actually need to draw the link between our mission and our objectives. We actually need to measure key KPIs. And I'm not going to go too much into detail because our honored guest, Nikki, is going to talk about their measurement system in a moment at the MacArthur Foundation. But this is really the key between actually achieving your objectives. You have to measure what sort of externalities are influencing different parts of your company. What are your operations doing? How can you improve them? You need to know what's actually happening, what's inefficient. Measuring can allow you to do new internal initiatives. It can allow you to get better product development, stop looking at products as something you hand on, but how can you actually measure what happens in the future of your product, and also for new ventures and initiatives. So for us, we're very honored to have Nikki, who's going to present this later. And for us, every company should be circular. And ideally, every company would actually use the same measurement toolkit so that we could create a kind of mass benchmarking between all the companies. We have UN SDGs on one side, we have CIRCULYTICS for measuring. It could be quite a nice thing. Now we have integrating impact measurement into financial measures. So one of the ways that we look at it is at the moment when we work with companies and we build ventures and we're looking at which ventures to prioritize, we always look at what's the potential to grow, what's the ROI, the internal rate of return, what's the net present value after 5 years, what's the enterprise value. But we're hardly ever looking at what's the environmental value of this product or this new initiative, what's the societal value that it's creating. And this is something that once you start creating these objectives and measuring them with specific KPIs, you can start integrating your economic sort of measures as well as different societal and environmental measures too. And this is a very high level illustrative for the example. But if you kind of look at all the different KPIs that you might have, you can see that project 3, for example, although not being very good on the economic side, first one red is there, it provides an incredible environmental societal value, still profitable on the economic side, yet it would be an amazing value for the environmental societal. Why don't we consider it? Because we're actually investing in future sustainability of the planet. Again, little best practice company, well, actually massive company, one of the biggest in terms of equipment in the world. This is something that they find quite key actually to integrating in key decisions. Let's have this impact analysis model where we actually integrate economic, social, environmental sort of impact, and we can use this throughout all stages, from ideation through to measuring, through to reporting. And actually, I don't have it here, but Telefonica have started doing something they call a consolidated or integrated report. And when I read this, it doesn't look like a typical investor report. It looks like it's something that they're presenting to the UN on all the positive impact they're bringing. And also, taking this beyond, it's how do we start using this, and where do we start using it? Well, essentially, once you start kind of having this way of looking at different processes from a sort of integrated ROI perspective, you can start looking at your different parts of your operations internally, how you're functioning, and say, hey, we've measured this and it's cheap, but actually the environmental impact and the societal impact is quite negative. We need to reassess this. We can start prioritizing areas to improve in our operations. We can start applying this to products. How do we make better products that look beyond the initial use and maybe the secondary use? How do we create products that are better for reuse and that are designed to last longer? Also, we can build new ventures. How can we use this to ideate? How can we use it to kind of like drive new ideas? How can we use it to monitor, prioritize ideas, test them, and then again, report them? And for once, we feel that once you've managed to crack this internally with your own operations and own products, you can actually start exporting this and helping other companies do this too. If you've created a very cool process, a digital process to improve your operations, maybe this is something that other companies would be interested to consider making a new platform or project out of it. So if you want to learn more, again, this was just a very high level run through. Our focus is really on the CIRCULYTICS measurement impact, and something that we kind of encourage companies to get on board with as soon as possible. But if you want to learn more about how do you create this sort of integrated ROI, how do you create a sustainability agenda, this is something that at FoundersLane we can help you with. We can help you with actually finding ways to apply it and search for impact ventures, build them, and create your entrepreneurial task force. Without further ado, I will pass you to Nikki, who is going to share CIRCULYTICS. She's also going to give a brief introduction to the MacArthur Foundation, highlighting some of the core principles.
Thanks, Adam. I feel like all of the nice introductions you've given me have been a great boost for my ego today. Yeah, I'm going to give you a bit of an overview of the MacArthur Foundation and the circular economy model first. You may all be experts already, but I'll just go through it briefly so we're all on the same page, and then talk a little bit more about how we actually go about measuring these things. So 10 years ago, no one had probably heard of the MacArthur Foundation. We're a charity based on the Isle of Wight, which is where I'm calling in from now. And it might seem like a bit of a random place to be located, but it's actually one of the sailing meccas of the world. And that's where Ellen MacArthur's career started. She broke the world record for the fastest solo circumnavigator of the globe in 2005. And while Ellen spent all this time out at sea on her own with a very finite set of resources to live on her boat, she started to kind of think about the global economy and how we're really operating with this finite set of natural resources. And so long, our economy has really depended on the extraction of these finite natural materials. This linear system that we've operated in since the Industrial Revolution of taking materials out of the ground, making them into products that are used for only a short time, and then throwing them mostly into landfills or incineration, or they leak out into the environment. It's extremely wasteful and unsustainable. So there's this kind of hard cap on how long we can actually sustain this, this way of operating. And to give you some examples of what that waste actually looks like. So you might have heard this statistic, which the foundation came out with in our new plastics economy report. By 2050, there will be more plastic than fish in the ocean. And a truckload of clothes is landfilled or incinerated every second. And 1/3 of all the food produced globally is wasted. So not very uplifting statistics. And this waste comes at a really high economic value as well. 80 to 120 billion US dollars of plastic packaging material value is lost every year, and 5.7 trillion US dollars is lost due to the linear nature of our modern food systems. And it's not only the loss in material value and the energy and labor embedded in the products that we're creating that goes to waste, but it's also the added cost to society of the negative externalities that this system is causing in terms of pollution, climate change, and the destruction of natural capital. But luckily, there is a smarter way to do things, and there's also a huge economic opportunity behind it. And it's this model that we call the circular economy, and that's really what the Ellen MacArthur Foundation is focused on accelerating. So there are three principles of a circular economy, and in essence, the circular economy is the opposite of the linear economy. So rather than taking, making, wasting, it's an economy that's restorative and regenerative by design. It's an economy that can run on the long term. And it's a bit different than kind of more traditional sustainability, which is about making a linear system a bit more efficient, a bit less bad. A circular economy is actually about completely redesigning the way that we do things. So the first principle is to design out waste and pollution. So much of the waste created today can be traced back to decisions made at the design stage of products. So rather than treating the symptoms of pollution and finding ways to deal with that waste once it's generated, we need to design products so that waste and pollution aren't created in the first place. And a good example of this is Uhu by Notpla. They've created an edible membrane made from seaweed containing a mouthful of water or whatever liquid you want to put in it. And that's been trialed as a replacement for plastic bottles at marathons and festivals quite successfully. Then the second principle is to keep products and materials in use. A circular economy really favors activities that preserve value in the form of energy, labor, and materials. So this means things like designing for durability, modularity, reuse, remanufacture, and those enable us to keep products, components, and materials circulating in the economy at their highest value for as long as possible. An example of this is the headphones made by Gerrard Street. So we throw away more than 15 million kilograms of headphones every year, and that was really unacceptable to the two Dutch music lovers behind Gerrard Street. Their aim was really to redesign the whole experience by providing a set of headphones that they lease rather than sell. And they designed the headphones to be very modular so that individual parts can be replaced or upgraded. And they can get those pieces back and reuse, refurbish, and recycle as much as possible. Then the third principle is to regenerate natural systems. In nature, there is no concept of waste. Everything is food for something else. If a leaf falls from a tree, it feeds the forest. So what if we aspired not just to do less bad, but to do more good by returning valuable nutrients to the soil to really enhance natural resources? In Brazil, there's an agronomist by the name of Leontino Balbo. I might be pronouncing that wrong, but he inherited a sugarcane farm from his family. And when he inherited the farm, they were spending huge amounts on fertilizers and pesticides to grow their crops, which had really degraded the soil over time. And he decided to shift to regenerative agricultural practices, realizing that if you take care of the right conditions, so the soil and the interconnection of species in those ecosystems, the plants actually take care of themselves. And he was able to really eliminate a lot of waste and pollution while regenerating the natural ecosystems of the farm and surrounding areas. So these are the three principles of the circular economy, and the Ellen MacArthur Foundation's mission is really to accelerate the transition to this circular economy vision. And we do that across a few different activities. So we develop and disseminate evidence of the benefits of the circular economy. for different industries and different geographies. We also convene large groups of organizations behind this shared agenda to share, learn, and collaborate. And we have a big network of large corporate companies and smaller SMEs and innovators across value chains, industries, and geographies. Also universities, public bodies, and other nonprofits. And we create demonstrators of what the transition to a circular economy can look like in practice through our systemic initiatives. So we have a few systemic initiatives going on at the moment: the New Plastics Economy, Make Fashion Circular, the Food Initiative, and more recently, the Finance Initiative. And the feedback that we've been getting from our network over the last probably 2 years is that, well, it's all well and good to have this vision and language and framing of the circular economy, but actually as an individual business, you can't effectively implement this vision if you can't measure your circular economy performance. So that's what we set out to do at the foundation. And we launched at the beginning of this year our company level measurement tool called CIRCULYTICS, which is not actually a real word. You won't find it in the dictionary, but it's a combination of circularity and analytics, which we thought was very clever. So I think this quote from Alan Yope, the CEO of Unilever says it quite well. He says, moving to a circular economy requires businesses to rethink everything they do. And as we're making this transition, CIRCULYTICS will help us to pinpoint where we have more to do. So CIRCULYTICS is an assessment that essentially helps companies to benchmark how circular they are today, to set clear goals of where they want to get to, and track their progress year on year. And it really goes beyond measuring just material flows. It gives insights into all circular processes, shows areas for improvement, and also opportunities for strategic innovations. And we created CIRCULYTICS with a sounding board of companies in our network. So we spent most of last year with around 30 companies. This is just a snapshot of a few of those, to make sure that our methodology was really grounded in company reality and that we weren't just kind of getting stuck in this academic bubble. And the result of the assessment, so once you've logged into your account, input all your data and answered the questions, you get this one-page scorecard. And actually one of the companies in our network, Brambles, has kindly allowed me to share their scorecard, which they've recently disclosed. So I might just, this is a little bit small, so I'll just bring up the version so you can see it a bit better. So this is what the scorecard looks like. So you've got your overall score at the top, which is a letter score and kind of an indication of how well you're performing. I should probably mention what Brambles does. They're a supply chain logistics company. So they have a pool of reusable pallets and crates that they lease out as a service. And their core business model is really centered around reuse and refurbishment. So it's probably not surprising to them that they performed really well on the assessment. They already were quite confident in how they were doing in terms of circularity, but they did see value in having an independent assessment to kind of prove that and inform their internal KPIs. So then on the top here, you've got your score history, and the aim is for companies to do this on an annual basis in tandem with their non-financial reporting, so that they're kind of seeing their hopefully progress year on year. On the left here, where it says scorecard, you have a breakdown of the different elements of the score, which I'll go into a bit more detail later. Then you have the analyst commentary. So for companies with revenues over $1 billion annually, or companies that are in our network already, they receive this bespoke analyst commentary, which goes into a bit more detail about their results and offers some suggestions for next steps as well. And then finally, you have industry benchmarking. So once an industry we've collected enough data for an industry to provide anonymized benchmarking, then we would show here how well you've performed across the different themes of the assessment compared to peers in your industry. And that was really something important, especially from our network, to understand kind of how they were performing compared to other companies in their industry. So that's a bit of an overview of what the scorecard actually looks like. And having this breakdown of score really helps companies identify potential blind spots, but also opportunities. Another company in our network, DS Smith, which is a packaging company, they found that they didn't score very well in the people and skills section of the assessment. And that was really a blind spot for them. And they kind of pivoted from that result to invest more in training their employees internally on what circular economy means and what it means for their business, to really engage them and bring them on that journey. So just a snapshot of where we are today since launching in the beginning of this year. We have 570 companies signed up to CIRCULYTICS so far. 130 of those have revenues over $1 billion annually. And actually most of them are companies outside of the Foundation's network, which has been really positive feedback that we're not just addressing this need in kind of a niche group of our network, but there's broader demand. So then looking at what CIRCULYTICS actually measures. So because most companies are really early on in their path to circularity, we found it important to include indicators around the enabling conditions that need to be put in place to enable your transition to a circular economy. So this is kind of what the methodology looks like. So you've got kind of 30 indicators altogether, and we use weighted averages to go from the indicators to the overall score. And so there's two different categories, the enablers and the outcomes. The enablers are these enabling conditions that we found important to be in place to transition to circularity. And they're across 5 different themes. So we've got strategy and planning, which is asking basically, have you placed circularity in the heart of your strategy? People and skills, have you employed people and developed the skills required to transition to a circular business model? Are they empowered to be part of that journey? Then systems, processes, and infrastructure, have you invested sufficiently to support the change? Innovation, are you innovating new circular products, systems, or services? And finally, external engagement, are you promoting your circular initiatives and influencing those in your business sphere, such as clients or your supply chain? Because you really can't do it alone. It's such a systemic initiative to transition to a circular way of doing business. And then on the output side of the assessment, that's more of a snapshot of where you are today as a business, how circular you are today as a business. And that's looking at more quantitative things like your materials procurement, how you're designing your products and services, what kind of energy you're procuring or possibly producing, how materials are flowing out of your business, and if you're a financial institution, how you're lending to or investing in circular businesses. Then just a note on other efforts out there. So there is other stuff going on around measuring circular economy. And we have engaged with all of these different frameworks to make sure that we each have our kind of unique value proposition, and we're also aligning on methodology and definitions. But I would say, and maybe it sounds biased, but I do think that CIRCULYTICS is the most comprehensive tool out there because it's looking at the whole company level, and it's not just looking at material flows, it's really taking into account all of these enabling conditions around circularity. So where we are now is we've been running version 1 of the tool since the beginning of the year. and we've been working hard on improving that methodology to launch version 2 in October. And then post version 2, we have some version 3 big ideas that are kind of on the table at the moment that we're interested to work on. So one of those is kind of aligning Circulytics to the Sustainable Development Goals and showing how different parts of the circular economy can contribute to your strategy around Sustainable Development Goals. Then also implementing embodied emissions into the outcome sections of Circulytics. So this will kind of nicely tie up circular economy to the broader climate change emissions picture and show actually how are the materials and products you're procuring and producing linked to your emission reductions goals, and how can circular strategies help you reach those reduction goals. Then we've got Circulytics for financial institutions. So there's definitely interest from financial institutions in our networks to understand what this means for their portfolios and how to, what kind of data they should be looking for and how to collect that data and bring that into their decision making. And then finally, industry deep dives. So the current version of Circulytics is very much high level, applicable to all sectors. And we've had some demand to go a bit deeper into specific industries such as the fashion sector or plastic sector. And it is a free tool to use for all companies. So if you're interested in giving it a go, you can just go to circulytics.org and sign up for an account and go through the assessment.
Thank you very much, Nikki. If you don't mind, we'd still like to go over a few questions.
Yep.
So there's now many companies that are registered as members of the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. Are you seeing actually a lot of momentum and interest in measuring this impact? Also, for example, through this tool, do you feel perhaps that there is even an increased demand?
Sorry, I've got too many things open and I've
Sure, take your time.
Lost my train of thought. Yeah, so very much so. I think the demand initially came from our network, but as I showed, 80% of companies have signed up from outside of our network. So there is a broader demand and it is increasing. We're continuing to get requests for accounts. Of course, it could be accelerated. And I think investors have a lot of power there in terms of the kind of reporting and data they demand from their portfolio companies.
Mm-hmm. And what would you say are the key benefits or the competitive advantages for companies to measure their circularity?
Well, I think the key benefit is to kind of know where you stand. It's hard to bring circularity into your strategy or make decisions based on the circular economy principles if you don't know where you are today as a business. There are different competitive advantages of the circular economy model in general. It will be case specific depending on the type of business, but in general, adopting circular principles, circular economy principles, companies have the opportunity to generate more returns and mitigate risks. Often circular business models can create value through resource productivity and related cost savings, or through the development of new markets, which could bring in additional revenue streams. And then on the risk side, through reducing your linear risks, such as supply chain disruptions or volatility of resource prices. So there are all of these benefits to be captured. And I think measurement is kind of a good starting point to have an overview of where you are today as a business, and then being able to identify these risks and opportunities in your business and have some directionality of where you want to go.
Yeah, but then taking these benefits into account, what is stopping them? What is stopping them? What are basically the main barriers preventing the companies from becoming circular?
Well, I would say one of them is measurement. So not knowing where you stand today, and also just kind of knowledge of what it means for your business and going through that learning journey and understanding how to make the business case. Of course, there will be financing barriers in some instances if you really need quite an investment in your infrastructure, for example, to transition the way you're doing your business. There will often cases be a significant investment that needs to be made. Sometimes it could be material supply, quantity and quality. If you're trying to use reusable or renewable materials, a lot of these types of materials don't yet exist in the volumes that are needed. And it's really kind of a systemic nature to it. Everyone needs to move roughly at the same time to be able to scale up the whole process. And that can be helped by policy. So I guess policy is a potential barrier, but also enabler. Policymakers need to stop incentivizing linear ways of doing things and shifting incentives to more circular ways of doing things. And I think Europe is definitely a leader in this. The European Commission has adopted this circular economy strategy, which is starting to put the policy in place that's needed to accelerate the transition.
Yeah. Nathan, we've got a question from someone from the audience. Andrea is asking if Circulytics is also suitable for small companies, also for non-producing retail companies.
Yep, so it's applicable for service-based companies as well. So depending on kind of the archetype of how your business operates, you will see slightly different indicator questions in the outcomes section. And it is applicable to smaller companies. I think probably the framing of the enabler section is a little bit more aligned with how corporates operate, but I think it can still be applied to smaller companies, and we hope it's accessible to everyone, and definitely welcome any feedback if you try it and you feel it's really difficult to answer those questions.
Does anyone have any other scathing, difficult questions for Nikki whilst we still have the next couple of minutes? I think we're quite close to time. Frank, do you have anything else that you want to ask or add?
No, maybe one other. So then, Nikki, again, from your perspective, given the work from the MacArthur Foundation that it has been doing so far, both public and as well as private, with the private sector, how important, can you maybe stress it perhaps once more, is it that companies look beyond ROI and look to include new measurements and strategic investments and growth decisions as well? And maybe if there are no other questions, then I think this would be a nice close off. But yeah.
Well, I will stress that it's very important. In the long term, if you don't consider things like resource scarcity and the negative externalities of how your business operates in your risk assessment, eventually you won't have a business. But even in the run up to such a kind of longer term extreme scenario, you're still at risk of things like material price volatility, supply chain disruptions, risks around public perception where customers increasingly are expecting companies to do good, and risks around having stranded assets. Actually, BP and Shell recently announced that they're writing off billions of dollars in the value of their oil and gas assets. And they say that's both driven by the COVID pandemic, but also by climate change. And I think circular economy is a really interesting concept because you actually don't have to trade off between return on investment and doing the right thing. sure, you might need a kind of upfront investment to get there, but there is a clear economic opportunity up for grabs. And our finance team have done some research on kind of investment and financing of the circular economy. And interestingly, while it's still early days for circular economy aligned funds, in the first quarter of this year, out of the 6 public equity funds that are currently using the circular economy as a value driver, all but one of them outperformed their benchmark. And in line with a growing body of evidence on sustainable investment strategies outperforming traditional ones, BlackRock, for example, they've seen better risk adjusted performance across their sustainable products globally during recent downturns. And in the first quarter of this year, 94% of their sustainable indices outperformed their benchmarks. So I think there's increasing evidence that not only is it's not just about doing the right thing, there's actually opportunity in this space, and more investors are coming on board with that.
Yeah. Again, I think we're also biased, but couldn't agree more. And I think this was a really good recap and summary. Thank you very much, Nikki, for joining.